Okay, hello everybody and welcome to Teacher Webinar 5 on Appreciative Inquiry. This is part of our webinar series on experiential learning, preparing young people for success after school. Today's webinar is brought to you by Teach a Man to Fish. We are an educational charity based in the United Kingdom whose mission is to empower young people with the skills that they need to succeed in school, work, and life. Webinar 1 was on the growth mindset. Webinar 2 was all about supporting students to learn from mistakes. Webinar 3 was on supporting students to become better problem solvers. And webinar 4 was about the power of effective questioning. But if you didn't attend those sessions, don't worry, you can find them all on YouTube on the Teach a Man to Fish learning channel, and I've included the links at the end of this presentation, which I will be sharing with you by email after today's webinar. Now, before we start, I'd just like to share some ground rules for today's webinar. You'll notice that you're all on mute at the moment. That's because we have about 60 people here in the webinar, which is great, but it does mean that we can't all be speaking at the same time. But don't worry, because there'll be plenty of opportunities later on to interact with other participants and share your thoughts. At regular points in the webinar, I will ask questions, which you can either answer via the text box, which lots of you are using already to introduce yourselves, or via the various polls which will appear on your screen. And I'll also invite some of you to turn on your audio and video and speak to the rest of the group. If at any point you have a question for me, please could you put it in the Q&A section rather than the chat box, and that way I'll be sure to see it and make sure to answer your question. And just so you know, this webinar is also being streamed live on Facebook. So hello if you're watching over on Facebook. It does mean though that you're not actually here in the Zoom room with us. So I won't see any comments that you post on Facebook, but my colleague Susanna is over there and she will be answering any questions or comments that you leave on our Facebook page. Okay, so that was a little bit of housekeeping for today. Now a bit about me. Some of you may know me already, especially if you've joined the other webinars over the last few weeks. My name is India, and I work on the School Enterprise Challenge team here at Teach a Man to Fish. Okay, so before we get started with the content for today, it would be great if those of you that haven't already could just introduce yourselves briefly in the chat box. Feel free to post your name, which country you're from, if you've taken part in SEC before, and what age your students are, that kind of thing. And we'll see who we've got here with us today. So I saw earlier we had lots of teachers introduced from Sri Lanka. We've got people from India, Kenya, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Liberia, Nigeria. It's so great to have such an international audience. Albania as well, Pakistan. Thank you very much, and please do continue introducing yourselves. Okay, so let's get started with the content for today. So the duration of this webinar will be approximately 1 hour. I'll try to keep it under that. It might just depend how chatty you are. And in the next hour, we are going to be looking at what appreciative inquiry is and why appreciative inquiry is useful, especially in an education setting. Then we will take a quick look at the School Enterprise Challenge. And after that, I will share a simple activity which you can use to introduce your learners to the concept of appreciative inquiry. And finally, I will be explaining how you can teach appreciative inquiry to your students by sharing 2 practical tools which you as teachers can use to go through an appreciative inquiry process with your students. And these 2 tools are called the 5 Ds of appreciative inquiry and the problem to opportunity tree. And at the end of this webinar, I will also share with you all a link to a survey. And when you complete the survey after the webinar, you will be emailed your certificate of attendance. I will also be sharing these presentation slides and a list of useful resources with you by email after today's webinar. So there's no need to take notes of what's on screen if you don't want to. Okay, hopefully that sounds good to you all. So now it's time to get started with the content for today. And we're actually going to start with a quick little game. So I'd like you to take a moment and ask yourself the question, am I feeling tired today? So I'll give you a few moments to think about that and answer the question in your head, or you can post in the chat box, are you feeling tired today? Okay, so if you ask most people if they're feeling tired today, they'll tend to answer yes. And I bet even if you didn't, once I asked you that question, your thoughts probably started to turn toward the feeling of being tired. You might have started to become more aware of how tired you were feeling, even though a few moments ago before I asked you the question, it might not have crossed your mind that you were feeling tired. And so what that means is that our minds move in the direction of the questions we ask. And now just imagine for a moment that instead of me asking, are you feeling tired today? I had instead asked, what makes you feel energized today? Asking the question in that way can help to reset your energy levels and help you tune in to what you really appreciate and value, focusing on what makes you feel energized rather than what makes you feel tired. And there's another good example which you might appreciate, especially if you're a parent. So if you ask your child when they get home from school, what did you do today? You might not get a very dynamic response. But if you ask instead, what's the best thing that happened to you today? Or what are you most proud of achieving today? You'll probably get a much more inspiring response. So hopefully this little game has set the scene for today's webinar and got you thinking about the power of asking questions in a positive way and framing situations in a positive light. It's a good reminder that the questions we ask shape not just the answers we receive, but also our attitude as well, which leads us in nicely to the focus for today's webinar. And in the words of John Lubbock, what we see depends on what we look for. Now, in the last webinar, we talked about the power of effective questioning and some questions which teachers and learners can use to help students reflect on their learning experiences and develop a growth mindset. And as a brief reminder for those of you that didn't attend the previous webinars, learners with a fixed mindset believe that their intelligence, their ability and talents are fixed traits which can't be changed. Whereas learners with a growth mindset believe that their intelligence, ability and talents can be developed through effort and hard work. We all have a mix of both mindsets, but it is possible to develop your growth mindset through experiential learning and reflection on that learning. The learning journey diagram, which you can see on screen and that we developed here at Teach A Mentor Fish, shows that learning is a messy process. It involves trying things, failing, having another go, struggling, relearning a skill, encountering an obstacle maybe before finally overcoming it, succeeding, and so on. The learning cycle continues. And it's through this process of experiencing failure and picking yourself back up, which helps to develop your growth mindset and reach the success part at the top of the ladder. Because after all, knowledge is best gained through experience and reflection on that experience. So today we're going to be building on what we discussed in the first 4 webinars about the development of a growth mindset and the learning journey. And we're going to be delving even deeper into the topic of effective questioning by investigating how the techniques of appreciative inquiry can help learners to develop this growth mindset. And at this point, I would just like to know, before you registered for today's webinar, had you heard of appreciative inquiry before? So in just a moment, you'll see a poll on screen and you can vote via the poll. Had you heard of appreciative inquiry before today's webinar? Okay, so a couple of people in the chat box, Fatima, Tabiso, saying that you hadn't heard of it. I'll just give everyone a few more seconds to finish voting. Okay, so most of you have voted now, so we're going to leave it there. The majority of you say that you haven't heard of appreciative inquiry, about 65% of you. About 15 people said that they have heard of it, and a few people aren't sure. But don't worry if you answered that you hadn't heard of appreciative inquiry before, because I'm going to be explaining it to you now. So appreciative inquiry is essentially a process for facilitating positive change. At its heart, it's about the search for the best in people, in their organizations, and in the world around them, which is full of opportunities and strength. And the concept came about from an article published by David Cooper Ryder and Suresh Srivastava in the late 1980s. They argued that the traditional approach of problem solving in businesses, for example, is overused and outdated, and that instead we should focus on discovering the root causes of success rather than exploring the causes of failure. So appreciative inquiry really calls for a positive shift in energy, moving away from this idea of fixing what's broken and instead looking at building on what we know works well. So it allows us to discover our strengths, to acknowledge the efforts of others, and to build a spirit of innovation and the power to realize our dreams. And why is that so important? Because positive actions combined with positive thinking results in success. So to sum up, appreciative inquiry is an intervention tool that asks individuals to focus on strengths and successes rather than problems and failures, to bring about a positive change in themselves, in their team or their organization or school, or in a bigger system. And the model of appreciative inquiry is based on a cycle of 5 Ds. So I'm going to briefly explain what those 5 Ds are now, and then later on I will be introducing you to a tool which you can use as teachers to lead your learners through this process of appreciative inquiry. So the 5 stages of appreciative inquiry are, first of all, to define. That's defining what is the focus of your inquiry. So this is the guiding question which will define the purpose of your inquiry, what it is that you want to see a positive change in, what you want to achieve. The second D stands for discover. And this means appreciating the best of what is and finding out what works. So rediscovering and remembering all of your past successes and strengths. The third D stands for dream. And this is imagining what could be. And you do this by using your past achievements and successes, which you identified in the discovery phase, to imagine new possibilities and to your dream future. The fourth D stands for design, or in other words, determining what should be. So bringing together the best of what is from the discovery phase and the what could be from the dream phase to create what should be the ideal situation. And the final D stands for destiny, which is sometimes also known as deliver. This is creating what will be. So focusing on how your design is delivered and embedded to make it a reality. Now, I must say at this point that appreciative inquiry is often met with skepticism initially, because many of us believe that our most powerful learning comes from analysing past mistakes. And as we've discussed in previous webinars, reflection on mistakes is an important part of the learning journey, but it's not the only path to success. So we've been conditioned by years of a problem-solving approach. Traditionally, if a problem becomes apparent in a business, leaders will thrash out a strategy to, quote, solve the problem. But a problem-solving approach assumes that we suffer problems because of a fundamental lack of something, a lack of resources maybe, a lack of knowledge, a lack of technology, and so on. And having this kind of deficit-based approach, focusing on what we're lacking and what we're missing, can be a real drain on our energy and motivation. But by contrast, appreciative inquiry starts from a completely different premise to problem solving. It assumes that there are examples of success in our past that we can learn from to create greater success in the future. So using an appreciative inquiry approach, you start by identifying what's already working well and the values and motivations behind those successes in the discovery phase of the 5D cycle. And then this is followed by a creative sharing of ideas to make things even better in the dream phase, and a positive strategy starts to emerge in the design phase. So new ways of working occur as exciting opportunities, and you start to build momentum, coming up with ways to capitalize on your strengths and drive forward positive change. It's a proven process that empowers any group to find what's working, create their ideal vision, and find a way to get there together. So, as I mentioned earlier, appreciative inquiry was developed in the 1980s. And since then, it's been used by organizational sectors all around the world to bring about positive change, from large corporations like Hewlett-Packard to government agencies like the US Navy, through to the United Nations. And the reason that we're talking about it today is because it can also be such a powerful tool to use with your learners. So just like with adult business people in a real company, it can also be applied in the classroom to help students practice positive reframing, to identify and value their strengths and skills, to select goals, to create action plan, and take responsibility for their progress. Using an appreciative inquiry process then with your learners can help to create a more engaging learning environment, as it gives learners the opportunity to celebrate their successes and strengths and really hone in on their motivation for improvement. It also stimulates their creativity and cultivates an openness for change, what's needed for the development of the growth mindset that I was speaking about earlier, because the process recognizes that growth is best nurtured from the foundation of our strengths. So this means that it can be especially powerful for learners who might be feeling a little bit demotivated or disengaged. And what's more, studies have shown that children who went to schools that promoted appreciative inquiry through daily activities and games were more competitive and self-driven than their peers. And they were also more creative, positive-minded, and considerate of their fellow students. So now that you know a little bit about what appreciative inquiry is and why it can be beneficial, you're probably nearly ready to find out how you can use it with your learners. And in a moment, I am going to introduce you to a tool to do just that. But before I do, I would like to ask, have you taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before? So in just a moment, you're going to see another poll appear on screen. Please vote to let me know, have you ever taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before? I'll just give you a few more seconds to vote. Okay, so far, most of you haven't taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before. Just give you a couple more seconds for the last few people to vote. Okay, we'll end it there. So about 2/3 of you have never taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before, 1/3 of you have. So for those of you that don't know, the School Enterprise Challenge is a free educational program run by us here at Teach a Man to Fish. And for the last 10 years, we've been supporting participants, so teams of students and teachers from all over the world, to plan, set up and run their very own real businesses. So school teams come up with exciting and innovative business ideas, they write their own business plan, and then they go on to launch their business, selling the real product or service to real people and earning real money. And over the years, we've seen school teams set up all sorts of different businesses like tuck shops, plant nurseries, handicrafts, stationery, the list goes on. And through taking part in the School Enterprise Challenge, students develop the skills that will make them successful in life and employment. Skills such as their ability to relate to one another, to work as part of a team, to communicate effectively, to problem solve, to innovate, as well as raising their aspirations for the future and developing business knowledge, of course. And the reason that I wanted to tell you a little bit about that now is because I'm going to be sharing these practical tools with you, which you can use to carry out an appreciative inquiry with your students. And we'll be talking about them in the context of a school business. But don't worry if you haven't taken part in the School Enterprise Challenge before, because appreciative inquiry can really be applied in any setting, not just a school business. Okay, so you might be thinking now that appreciative inquiry is quite a big concept, and you might be wondering how to explain it to your learners, especially if they're quite young. The good news is you don't have to explain it in exactly the same way as I have done today. It's up to you to choose how you'll explain appreciative inquiry to your learners. And of course, it will depend on how old they are. So you can refer back to the definitions, which are on the earlier slides to help. And there are also lots of great videos on YouTube, which can help to explain it. Today, I just wanted to show you a simple and fun activity which you can do to introduce the concept of appreciative inquiry to your learners. And that is an individual self-discovery exercise. So I'll explain how it works now. It's really simple. It only takes about 30 minutes, and you can do it in person at school or with an online tool like Zoom or Google Hangouts, if that's how you're staying in touch at the moment. So what you'll do is give your students some pen and paper and ask them to recall and draw one of the happiest moments of their lives. Give them about 10 minutes or so to do this. It doesn't need to be a really elaborate drawing, just a simple illustration will do. So to draw the happiest moment of their lives. Then get your students to take it in turns and describe what they've drawn to the rest of the group. So in this step, each student will come up with a brief narrative about the story that they've sketched. And try to encourage your other students to listen carefully to each story that's being told and to ask questions to find out more details. So that's all there is to it. And the reason that this activity is relevant to appreciative inquiry is because, first of all, students get to relive a happy moment from their past and experience all the positive emotions that come with remembering it. Secondly, students can reflect on these feelings and emotions while they describe what it is that they've drawn. And this reflection on the high points in their lives may start to reveal the factors and foundations that enable this positive outcome to occur, or in other words, their assets and their strengths. And by listening to others asking them questions, the students narrating their happy story will get to understand a little bit about what an appreciative inquiry session might look like and how they can make the most of it in the way that they recall these positive memories, they recall their strengths and past successes, and ask questions. Okay, so that was the short introductory activity that you can use to get your learners in the right mindset. And next, I'm going to be introducing you to a tool which you can use to actually apply appreciative inquiry in your classroom. So as I explained earlier, the appreciative inquiry process works through 5 stages. And the 5 stages are define, discover, dream, design, and destiny, or sometimes known as deploy. So I'm going to explain how you can work through these 5 stages with your students. This works best with secondary school students, but you could definitely adapt and simplify it if your learners are a bit younger. It's best to allow plenty of time for each of the 5 stages, around 20 to 30 minutes for each step. So you might want to break this activity up over a number of days or even over a number of weeks. And if your school is currently closed because of lockdown, but you have a way to keep in touch with your students, for example, through Zoom or Google Hangouts or WhatsApp, then it is possible to go through this process remotely. So the first step in the process is define. This is where students select the topic of their inquiry. And if you started off with the individual self-discovery exercise, which I just explained, then you can now explain to your learners that they're going to go through a similar process of recalling positive memories and past successes in order to build a better future. And the first step in the define phase is for your learners to select exactly which topic they want to focus on. And it could be any topic related to their school business or to their school studies where they want to see a positive change. So you guide your learners to frame the topic in a positive way. For example, if their topic was going to be time management, instead of their question being, why is our time management so bad? A better way to frame it would be, how can we make the best use of our time? And a good way to help your learners to frame the topic in a positive way is to encourage them to start with the question with, how can we, or how do we? It's really important at this stage to use positive language to frame the inquiry. So today, we are going to work through an example using the topic, how do we build a school business team that everyone is proud to be part of? This is a good one to get students communicating and working more effectively together and to get them excited to be a part of the School Enterprise Challenge. So once the students have defined which topic they're going to focus on, you can move on to the discover stage, which is all about discovering what's working well and drawing out stories of the system working at its best. So in our example, that would be stories of good teamwork. And the way to do this is to get your students to create a list of high points or peak moments which are related to their topic of inquiry. So for example, in our case of teamwork, it would be stories of when their team was working at its best. And you can help to draw out these stories by asking your learners questions like, what are some moments of great joy you remember having with the team? When was the team working at its best? How did it feel to be part of a team that was working well? What happened when the team was working well? What were the enabling factors? And what was important to you about this experience of good teamwork? So you can do this discover step by getting students to write down their answers and then share them with the group, or you could just have an open discussion altogether. And during this discovery phase, your students are creating a list of strengths, so examples of their good teamwork from the past and the skills that they use to achieve that. And at the same time, you're building rapport and helping students to reconnect with their motivation. So students will look back on their accomplishments and really appreciate the value in what they've already achieved. And what's good about this is that once you know what works well, it's easier to think of ways of building on those strengths and successes to do more of what's worked well in the future. So once your students have discovered their positive memories and they're feeling energized, it's time to move on to step 3, which is to dream about what's possible by collecting all the wisdom from the discovery phase and imagining the future. So in the dream phase, you're going to get your students to write out their goals. In this case, their goals related to better teamwork, using the strengths and the skills that they just identified in the discover stage. And the dream stage really depends on your students' creativity and their excitement about what's possible. So try to make it clear that the sky's the limit and there's no dream that's too ambitious or too idealistic to share in this phase. And to help with this dream step, you could ask your students, in the case of our example, what does the ideal team look like to you? What does great teamwork mean to you? So they might say, for example, that their dream team is one where they feel appreciated and valued by their team members, and where it's clear who is responsible for what, so they know who they need to go to if they need help or they have a question about a different part of the business. They might also say that their dream team is fair because they get to take it in turns, rotating responsibilities, so everyone gets the opportunity to sell their product, for example. So once your students have written down their goals in the dream step, it's time to wake up from the dream and make it a reality by moving on to the design phase. And this is all about building bridges to your dream future based on the best of what you've discovered about the past and the present. So now that your students' vision for great teamwork is starting to take shape, it's time for them to design some concrete activities and actions which will move them towards their collective vision of the ideal school business team. And the best way to do this is to get students to draft an action plan with the specific steps they need to take to reach their goals, the ones that they came up with in the dream phase. And it's really important that students come up with an action plan which they truly believe they could accomplish. So breaking down the action plan into smaller steps can make it easier to commit to and more manageable. And if students are struggling with how to approach the action plan, a good way to get them started is for you to ask them, if you were granted 3 wishes for this situation, what would they be? And what could you do to make those wishes start coming true? So, for example, with our topic of better teamwork, the action plan might include some commitments like we will hold recruitment days and interview prospective members of our team. We'll draft and develop job descriptions and roles and responsibilities so that everyone knows what they need to do. And we will appreciate our team members by running schemes such as Employee of the Week or Employee of the Month. And we will celebrate the winners by announcing this in our assemblies. So now that you have an action plan in place, the final step of the appreciative inquiry is deploy, or sometimes known as destiny. And this is making it happen. So this is when your students commit to the aspirations that they've agreed on in the design phase. And the key here is sustaining the energy and inspiration that you've built up during the discover and dream phases. So it can be helpful to get students to categorize and divide up some of the actions which they came up with in the design phase to make sure that they're all taken forward. So for example, someone volunteering to draft the interview questions for prospective team members, someone else taking up responsibility for setting up a voting system to choose the employee of the month, and so on. And then I recommend that as a teacher, you follow up with students a few days or weeks after doing an appreciative inquiry exercise like this to acknowledge and celebrate your students' accomplishments in making progress on their action plan. And you can also encourage students to note down their progress and to talk about it with their classmates for positive reinforcement and recognition. Because this recognition from you as a teacher and also from other students can affirm to your students that they have control over their life. They have control over their ability to develop and improve what we call the growth mindset and really to achieve great things. So as you can see, this entire process is designed to counteract the negative feelings that can sometimes damage students' belief in their ability to do well at school and beyond. And by focusing on their strengths and becoming authors of their own action plans, students are more likely to feel empowered, to commit to improvement, and to take responsibility for moving towards their goals. And the destiny phase doesn't really have a distinct end point, because after this activity, your students will hopefully find that they're continuously learning about and reflecting on their collective strengths and adjusting their vision for the future. And so appreciative inquiry is an ongoing process that will inevitably bring you right back to the beginning of the cycle of 5Ds as your students discover what's working, and they develop new dreams, and they design new and improved processes for achieving them. Okay, so that is how you can use the 5Ds to go through an appreciative inquiry process with your students. I'll just go back a few slides so you can see the 5Ds all in order. And I would really like to know if you would consider using this tool with your students. Would you consider going through a process of appreciative inquiry using the 5Ds with your students? So I'll invite you to answer via another poll. And then we have a few minutes for you to share your thoughts and any questions you might have about this. But first of all, if you can just vote in the poll on screen would you consider using the 5 Ds of appreciative inquiry with your students? And I'll give you a few more seconds just to vote now. Okay, very positive. About 95% of you say that yes, you would consider using it, which is great. We have a couple of people that aren't sure. I'll just leave that running for a few more moments if you haven't voted yet, so that you can do. And now, as I said, I'd like to invite some of you to share your thoughts on this activity. So please feel free to write your comments in the chat box. Let me know what you think about it. And if you'd like to come forward, especially to share your thoughts with the rest of the group, please let me know in the chat box. And I will invite you to unmute yourself so you can share your thoughts with the rest of the group. So I can see already Payal says that it's a really effective tool for students. That's great to hear. And Ravindra says they'll use it because it's very catchy. That's quite right. It can be a little bit difficult to get your head around at first, but it does quite help that the 5 steps all begin with this D. So once you've gone through it once, it will become much more familiar. And it is indeed quite memorable. If you've got any other comments, what you think about it, or if you have any questions, please do post them in the chat box now. So Rana says that it's a very practical tool. Debbie has commented that it's a good tool to develop learners' creativity. Absolutely. And Jana says that she would like to implement it. Okay, so I do have one more tool that I want to share with you later, but just before that, we've got time to just talk a little bit more about this one. So Needy says that it's a very inspirational tool. Needy Jane, I'm just going to promote you to panelist and invite you to tell us a bit more about it, what you think about it. It'll just take a moment to load and then you can come off mute. Hello, Needy.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi. What did you think of this tool, the 5 Ds of appreciative inquiry?
It's a very inspirational tool, I think, because it is directly related the whole process of the planning, how we can implement the, how can we design the we can critically think, students can critically think where to stand, where to start, and how to finish the activity. So I think it is very inspirational and very creative tool.
Great, thank you so much, Needy, for sharing your thoughts. Just have another quick look at the chat. A few more people are saying that they like how it's interactive and an interesting tool to promote learning. Okay, so I'm going to leave my colleague Susanna to finish answering any questions that you might have about this tool in the chat box. So if you do have any questions, feel free to write them there. And I'm just conscious that we've only got a few minutes left, so I am going to move on and share with you another tool. So I appreciate that the 5 Ds tool that we just went through does require quite a big mindset shift for learners, if they might not be used to working in that way. So I wanted to share with you another tool which is a bit simpler and more visual So it's especially good for slightly younger learners, and it might be an easier way to ease students into appreciative inquiry. And it's called the problem to opportunity tree. So this activity is shorter. It takes about 40 minutes, and all you need is 2 big pieces of paper and pens. It works well in a group, but if your school is currently closed because of lockdown, you could get students to complete this activity individually at home and then compare their results either online or over the phone once you get back to school. So the first step in the problem to opportunity tree is to get students to define what problem they're facing. So we'll take a different example this time. Let's say that it is a lack of leadership in the school business team. So on your first big piece of paper, you'll get a volunteer to draw a tree with roots and to write the problem, lack of leadership in this case, on the tree trunk. And then the second step is to ask your students, what are we feeding our lack of leadership tree? What do the roots look like? So get students to suggest ideas of what contributes to this lack of leadership. They might say, for example, there's no clear roles and responsibilities, or a fear of failure if someone steps up to be the leader of the team, or a lack of confidence to step up and be the leader. Then next, you're going to draw the leaves on your tree. And you'll do that by asking your students, what sort of leaves do you think your tree will grow if this is what you're feeding it? So again, get your students to throw out their feelings of what this lack of leadership is leading to, what it might result in the future. So for example, they might say that without a clear leader, there will be arguments, they won't have a clear business strategy, their profits might start to fall, and so on. So this is obviously a simplified example, and when you do this with your students, you can take a bit more time to explore the answers to these questions of what roots are feeding the problem and what leaves will the problem tree grow by coming up with more responses and drawing lots more roots and more trees, leaves even, on the problem tree. Okay, so that is your problem tree done. And then on your second big piece of paper, you'll then get a student to draw a second tree and ask your students, what is the opposite of their problem? In this case, what is the opposite of a lack of leadership? And the answer is strong leadership. So get a student to write that on the trunk of your opportunity tree. And to build strong leadership, what roots do you need? What nutrients do you need to feed your tree? So get your students to brainstorm and share ideas to answer this question. What nutrients do you need to feed the roots of your opportunity tree? They might say, for example, they need a plan to rotate responsibilities, and they need trust. They need respect for one another, and to encourage their peers to take that leap and step up to be a leader. And as students begin to share these ideas for growing their opportunity tree, they'll begin to visualize and verbalize how they can move from a problem to possibilities. And then finally, ask your students to think about the leaves on their opportunity tree. So if they have strong leadership, what would be the results? What leaves would their opportunity tree grow? It might be, for example, higher profits, better customer service, higher productivity, improved team morale, better communication amongst the team. And so you can see that turning the problem tree, a lack of leadership, into an opportunity tree, strong leadership, is a really nice analogy that can generate an enthusiasm and energy for a more positive future. And by turning the problem tree into an opportunity tree, students will not only see how they can make the opportunity a reality. So those are the ideas that they came up with for the roots of their opportunity tree, like a rotation plan, encouraging and trusting and having respect for one another. But they'll also appreciate the value in taking those ideas forward. In other words, the leaves of the opportunity tree, like improved morale and higher profits and better communication. Okay, so that is all that there is to that one. As I said, it's simpler and it's more visual, and it might work especially well for younger learners to help to turn their problems into opportunities using some of the theory behind appreciative inquiry. So I'd love you to share your thoughts on this activity. I can see that some of you have already started to do so. Please feel free to share your comments. If you think that this is something that you might use, or if you've maybe even used something similar before, please let me know in the messages section. And then we've got time maybe to invite one or two of you to share your thoughts with the rest of the group. So Ravindra says it's a superb idea. Shalini says it's a wonderful analogy. Someone else said it's to use the analogy is a good way to help learners to understand the concept. Lots of great positive comments. I'm glad to hear that you like the sound of this activity. Misted commented very quickly, so Misted, let me invite you to come off mute and to share your thoughts with the rest of the group. It'll just take a moment or two to load. Hi, Misted.
How are you, India?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm quite fine. How are you doing there?
Yeah, very good. Tell me, what did you think about this problem to opportunity tree exercise?
That one is quite a good thing. We've been using that one even in our classrooms there. But one thing I would like to ask you there is, when you're using the tree diagram thing, is it actually correlated at the same time with the questioning techniques that we also use here, where we've got open-ended questions? Do they actually tally so that this program can come out to be the best one? Because I really appreciate that the opportunity tree is the best, but I need you to tell me whether the questioning techniques also go hand in hand with it.
I'm sorry, the line is not very good. I struggle to understand your question. Would you mind repeating it or writing it in the message section?
Let me write it in the section there.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. It's just not a very good quality line. Okay, I'll make sure to answer it if you ask your question in the chat section. Thank you, Mr. Let me try somebody else and see if we can hear from you any better. Lots of people saying it's a great way to solve problems, simple and easy to use. That's nice to hear. Margaret, you've left a really nice comment saying that you think it's a great tool which will help students to solve problems themselves through critical thinking and also enhance a student's sense of identity. I'd like to explore that a bit more, so I'm just going to unmute you now, and then you can tell me a bit more of what you thought about this activity. Hello, Margaret. Margaret, hello. Okay, struggling to hear Margaret as well. But yeah, she says that it's a tool that she'll definitely share with her colleagues. And I can see a few more great comments as well. Shalini says that it will help the teachers and learners to actually pinpoint the problems in learning and get down to the root causes. And Singer says as well that the tool invites double reversal brainstorming, giving the opportunity to think in 2 phases, from negative to positive. Exactly right. Okay, so I'm afraid that is all that we have time for today. But I have included in the presentation slides some useful links to articles where you can read more about appreciative inquiry online. And there are also lots of books as well as videos about it on YouTube. And the second point on the slide is a link to an article on the Positive Psychology website, which has loads more games, activities, and tools based on appreciative inquiry. So if you liked the sound of the ones that I shared with you today, then I really recommend that you go and check out that second article on the Positive Psychology website. And I also wanted to mention in particular the last point on the slide, which is a link to a worksheet which you could adapt for your students. It's a strategic planning tool called SOAR analysis, which stands for Strengths, Opportunities, Aspirations, and Results Analysis. And although we didn't have time to go through that one today, it is another great process tool for bringing about positive change, which is based on appreciative inquiry. Finally, as promised, you can get your attendance certificate. I'm going to post the link to the survey in just a moment in the chat box. And once you fill in this really short survey, you will receive your certificate by email. And I'll also be sharing the link to the survey with you by email after today's webinar, along with the presentation slides that I've used. And your feedback is really important to help us develop future webinars which are of interest to you. So please do take a moment to fill in the survey and claim your certificate of attendance. I really hope that you found today's webinar useful. Please make sure to stay connected with us on social media to find out about even more webinars that we will be running for you over the next few weeks. And remember, if you're not already taking part in the School Enterprise Challenge, you can find out everything that you need to know and register for free on our website, which is www.schoolenterprisechallenge.org. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. That is all from me. You're free to go now, but I will just stay here for a few minutes to answer any last questions. Thanks very much, everyone, and goodbye.